Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to show the process I went through to create this, a black and white print, black and white picture of a tree. I'm going to go through it in relative detail, covering the basic process, but the key elements are that I took the photograph for this with the Fuji GFX100S. Now this is a 100 megapixel camera. It's medium format, and this is produced as one of the images I took when I went out testing the camera for a review. I liked the image and thought I'll make a print for that, in particular because I happen to be testing some new papers for the Epson P5000 printer, and this particular paper is an Innova paper. It is exhibition cotton gloss. It's 335 grams, so it's quite a heavy paper. It's a roll paper, and I've printed it black and white, and I've printed it using the ABW print mode. Now that means that you could get virtually identical results if you were using an Epson P900 on this, or P700 with smaller paper, or if you were using Canon you'd get very similar using the black and white print mode on the Canon Pro 1000, for example. But this particular one, I'm going to try and show some of the aspects of the actual image file I got. The photograph was taken with a 23mm f4 lens here. It's a hefty old lens. It's a very high quality lens. Now I'll mention a little bit about the image quality itself and how I processed the image. But really this is the whole thing, from taking a photograph, some of the exposure influences I did. When I was testing the GFX100, part of looking at it was to realize that with the sensor it's got, I have to change my approach to exposing images slightly. Now I've been doing landscape prints for years, and I'm actually looking at this GFX as a potential replacement for my Canon 5DS, 50 megapixels. Now obviously there's more megapixels, but that's not really that much of a difference. It's not that much the megapixels we're talking about here, although it does make a difference. So the picture itself, it's an oak tree in some woods near in Leicestershire, and this is the actual photo, as it were, out of the camera. Now I took RAW and JPEG, and I'm working with the RAW files. This is what the JPEG looks like. As you can see, there are a few little bits of sky poking through, but most of it is pretty black. Now, normally, previous cameras I've tried, I would have been very wary about expecting any usable detail in these dark areas, but it turns out that the kind of image sensor that this camera's got has got a lot more detail in the shadows, or more to the point, not nearly as much noise as I might have expected. So it means that I have to change my processing a little bit. So there's the image, very dark. That's with no adjustments at all done on it. If I look at a section of the image here, we can see bits of sky poking through it. And I've exposed this at about 80th of a second. I think it was f8, f9, something like that. So it's been exposed so that the sky is not burnt out. I've got a bit of colour in the sky. I could do a perfectly good colour print of this as well, but this is specifically for black and white. Here is part of the tree. Now, looking at that, there's not a lot you can see. When I change the RAW settings, now I'm using in this example Adobe Camera Raw on current version of Photoshop. You could do similar with Lightroom here. If I'd taken the picture, I took it at 100 ISO. If I'd taken it at a higher ISO setting and I was concerned about noise, I found that DxO Photo Lab handles the images from this camera really well. And it handles detail, it handles noise. That's only Photolab 5 because I'm unable to test Photolab 6 because it won't run on any of the Macs I've got. My kit is too old, I'm afraid. But there. So there's the difference. You can see quite clearly the difference between the image, as it were, out of the camera and the image after I've adjusted things a little bit. In fact, looking at this, you can clearly see it's an oak tree. Now I have to put some stronger glasses on than these to look in detail at this, but I can clearly see the shapes of the oak leaves against the sky. This print, I believe this one worked out at about, at this size, worked out at 550 odd pixels per inch. It's a very high resolution. Now, I happen to know that printers like this, P900, some of the other printers I've tested, can take higher resolution than what is supposedly the standard 300 pixels per inch. You can take the higher resolution and it is visible in your prints. Now, I've got videos about that. I've written articles about it. But suffice to say, sending more resolution than needed is of benefit here. Now, that's the print. How did I get to this image from this? Well, I've changed it. This is color. So I've now got a nice looking color image. I'm going to open that image as a color image and I'm going to use ProPhoto color space. Not because I'm concerned about out of gamut colors and things, but because I want to maximize the amount of information that's there in the color file for when I convert it to black and white. So there's some detail of the leaves, and you can clearly see detail of the oak leaves, the shapes. It was just at the start of autumn, so we've got a few leaves changing colour, but it's not really an autumnal scene. If it had been a more obviously autumnal scene, I might well have produced a colour version of this picture just to bring out the colours, because the GFX works very well for that. Now, could I have taken this picture on my Canon 5DS? Yeah, of course I could. I've been doing this for years. I'm a professional photographer. Yes, I could take this picture. I would have to be a bit more careful about my exposures and what I could get out of it. And I wouldn't have quite the level of detail for it. But yeah, don't think that you need a camera and lens like this for taking it. It makes it easier, but you don't need it. So we've got, you know, lots of detail here. I've got that color. This is the color image. I've boosted up a few things. I boosted up the color vibrance a bit. I've not really altered that much. I've pushed it a bit. We're at overexposed here in the development by about 2.5 stops. So it's pushed quite a bit, and I'm not seeing any real noise in the camera, in the files, I should say. There's the image after I've got as a color image. Now, if I was printing that as a color image, I'd probably lighten up some of this area here to bring out the color. There are a few leaves. There are masses of acorns all over the place. This tree has obviously produced a lot of acorns this year. There's a lot in these woods, but I've got the detail there. I could make a nice looking color image from it, but this is about black and white and the process I'll take for it. So there is the color image as produced, as converted. Now, there's a different version. What have I done? Well, what I've actually decided, the software offers you various lens corrections and lens aberration corrections. Now, both of these lenses, the 30mm and the 23mm lens, show virtually no chromatic aberration. However, the 23mm is a very wide angle lens on a medium format sensor. And so when I add lens correction, there is, and I'll flip back to it to show, the lens correction stretches the corners a bit. Now, I've noticed this before with doing shots with wide angle lenses, is that you often decide that the picture looks slightly better uncorrected. Now, I've left the correction for chromatic aberration on. It's not really needed, it's minuscule amounts, but I've turned off the correction that expands the corners. It gives a real wide angle look to it. I've also turned off the lens vignetting control, or I should say the correction vignetting control. Why have I done that? Because quite often I don't necessarily want to get rid of the vignetting. Now, it's nice to be able to adjust it if need be, but I don't want the image completely bright in the corners. if you're doing a print, sometimes a vignetting control just lets you draw attention into the print a little bit better. It's a matter of experience, and I wouldn't say for all lenses turn off the correction. Some lenses really do benefit from it, but this lens, I like the look of the image, and that's the structure of the leaves, the branches and everything, in the uncorrected version slightly better than I'd like the corrected version. So the only correction I'm applying here is to get rid of any chromatic aberration, and as I said, that's virtually negligible. Yeah, it is negligible. It's virtually impossible to see it. 1 or 2 parts, if you look very carefully, fraction of a pixel or so of color fringing, very little. But anyway, there is our color image. What am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to turn it into black and white. Now, for this example, I've used Nik Silver Effects. Now, plug-in, the handle conversion to black and white. I've used it for years, since it first came out, and I don't use all the presets other than perhaps just to get an idea. There are relatively few adjustments I've made here. I've altered the tonal balance a little bit to get a better print out of it. And I've increased the structure a little bit to give a little bit more differentiation to the branches as they're going to come out. I'm going to get lower contrast in a print anyway than I see on the screen. So as long as the screen looks okay, I'm fairly happy with that. Now, all the controls of Nik Silver Effects, you can alter them, you could tweak them. I would say I don't tend to turn the structure up too much, since it does produce slight haloing. And if there's one thing I really don't like the look of, it's haloing on stuff, on black and white images like this. You'll have seen it where there's a tree or a lamppost or something sticking up into the sky, and because of the adjustments that have been applied in the processing, it has a sort of slightly light halo around it or something. Once I see that, I can't unsee it, and it's something I don't like. So I used Nik Silver Effects here. I could have equally well have used a channel mixer or any number of different approaches to creating a black and white image. The key is I'm working on a calibrated monitor. That's good for black and white and for color. So I'm working on a calibrated monitor here. So the tonal balance I get on here is what I'm going to expect in a print. If you want to be doubly sure of things, and this one here, I've got a neutral grey background around the image, and this is a screenshot from when I was actually working and doing things. If you want to do that, you can make that white as it would look on a print, because the background colour does make a difference to how images are perceived. Certainly if I was to matte this and not put it in a white matte, if I was to frame it and put a matte around it, if I was to use a darker coloured matte, the image would look brighter. Now, this is something you just have to get some practice with when printing, because how a print looks is strongly influenced, obviously, by your editing and all things like that, but it's also influenced by the surround on it. Now, I've printed this on roll paper. This is 17-inch roll paper. I could have printed it on a sheet. I would love to see what this image looks like on a much bigger printer. There is real detail and structure in this image, and having looked at it, I need my strong glasses to really get the impression from this. That tells me that I really would like to see this as a big print, but this is the biggest printer I've got here at the moment. When I next do some testing of a larger printer, I will most definitely be reprinting this image. My choice of paper, by the way, this is the Exhibition Cotton Gloss. This is an OBA free, so it's a slightly warm paper. It's not a bright white paper. The slight warmth I find contributes to an image, makes it look just that little bit more natural than a brilliant white. Now, I might choose a brighter white paper as for some types of images, or a warmer colour. So it depends on the image to some extent. For colour images, yeah, I'll go for the brighter usually, but for the black and white here, this is as close as I get to toning or tinting, a choice of actual colour tone. So there's the black and white image. I've tweaked this with the sliders here, not that much, doesn't need much. Most of the tonality was taken care of in the original RAW conversion. You could, if you're using a tool that had localized adjustment, you might want to lighten up some of the darker areas here to show a little bit more detail, but I'm happy with what I've got here. Like most things, I find the more work I have to do on an image to get a print that I like, the more I take that as a hint that perhaps it's not the optimal source image. Great source images are really easy to work on. Now, I've had great prints that have taken a lot of work, but in general, all my best prints, my favourite prints, are ones that have not really taken that much work on to get the conversion from out of the camera to a print there. Now, this is looking at some detail in this, and in here I've added a bit of sharpening for print. Now I've used, since I've got the Nik software, I've used Nik Sharpener 3. Now I'm using just the output sharpener. I've turned down the output sharpening strength quite considerably so that I can't see any obvious halos or sharpening effects. Now the sharpening is obvious in the leaves here, but it's also obvious in the trunk of the tree in that there is sharpening in the dark to medium detail as well, so it just enhances contrast. I've not added any extra structure or anything like that, so this form of sharpening, you could do normal print sharpening. You could use something, you could use the print sharpening in Lightroom, for example, and it would give you probably quite reasonable results for this. Now, I don't like Lightroom, particularly for printing, for a whole host of reasons, but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate it as a useful bit of software that some people like. But I'm going to print this from Photoshop, so I have applied a bit of print sharpening just to crisp up the detail. And that crispness of detail is visible in the print. If it were a bigger print, it would be more visible, and I might change how I handled the sharpening a bit. But for a print at this size from a 100 megapixel image, there's not a lot of sharpening I need to do. Need to get rid of a little bit of the basic softness, but there's no great work. As I said, start with a good file, much easier to work on, less effort to do it. So that's that. How am I printing it? Well, I'm just using the straightforward Photoshop print dialog. That's it. I've said printer manager's color because I'm using the ABW mode. Now, in my testing for this paper, and I've got a review of this paper specifically coming up. This is an exhibition cotton gloss, one that I've known for quite a few years. The paper has a slight texture. It's a semi-gloss look to it. It's a nice feel to the paper. It has a nice rich feel to everything you produce on it. So I've done that. I'm printing this, when I print it with the printer settings, at the maximum 2880 printer resolution, the maximum printer detail, which on this particular printer, on this paper, gives me absolutely perfectly good results. If I was printing this on a P700, P900, I would be wary of using the very highest print quality settings, because I've noticed in testing of that, and I've got reviews and looking at this, I've noticed in testing that the really high quality settings on the P900, P700 can, on some papers, produce a bit of bronzing. Now on this one, there is not the slightest sign of bronzing whatsoever. One of the reasons I've liked this paper for years. I put notes as to what the various things I've used on this. If you look in the notes on the video, I'll add some detail there. But anyway, there is the print dialog, printer manager's color. If I was printing this on a Canon printer, I would use the Canon black and white print mode. I don't need any other adjustments because I know that that print mode is relatively linear, so I'm not going to get crunched up shadows or any problems like that. But if you're printing it using black and white and you don't know necessarily how linear the results are from your black and white print mode, you might want to print something like this a bit smaller to see that the printing itself doesn't lose all the detail in the deep shadows here. Now, in terms of paper size, it's print on a roll, so I specified a custom paper size of 430 by 600 millimeters. So 43 centimeters, 60 centimeters, and we've got a bit of extra on here. I don't make custom sizes for every single paper. Normally I shoot a slightly different aspect ratio, so this is a 4/3 ratio sensor. It's not the same as the 3:2 ratio that you get standard 35mm, so that's a slight difference I've allowed for on this, but this prints perfectly fine. And anyway, if you're going to print roll paper, you should have a decent cutter anyway to trim your prints to size. This has been cut by the printer when it's come out, but if I was framing this, I would trim this off a little bit more and would use it that way. So that's the custom settings. There's the actual print. There's a photograph of the print. Now I'll cut this and along with the others into the video so you can get an idea, because the photographs, the exposure of them is spot on. It's quite tricky to show prints and print detail in a video. Now colour should be fairly okay because I've taken some care with the lighting, but I can never be quite sure with the tonal balance. So there we've got a photograph of this print here taken earlier using a flash, and we've got the detail in it. That picture to me on this screen looks like how the print looks. So there we go. I just show some detail. Now there's a bit of graffiti. It is a few millimeters across on the actual print, deep in the rocks at the bottom here. Someone scratched some initials or something into the rocks. These rocks are some of the older rocks in England. This is in the Charnwood area, and the fossils have been found here, Ediacaran fossils, certainly some of the oldest fossils in Europe, found not far from where I am here. So it's an area I know from one of my previous careers as a geologist, as well as just somewhere that's some nice woodland to go around. So that's the detail there, and there is a photograph once again of the bit of the actual print itself, just showing some of the detail in the leaves that attracted me to the image when I started looking at it. So there we go. There's the walkthrough of how I made a print. It's really quite an easy one. There's nothing particularly complex about what I've done in making this black and white print. It involved getting a good picture to start with, deciding how to process the raw file, then taking that processed image and converting it to black and white. Now there are a number of different ways you can do this, but yeah, the technique I used with Silver Effects works well. I don't always use it, but when it works well, it works very well. I've taken the image. It's a huge image, so I haven't needed to resample it or do anything. I've just gone, right, okay, we're going to print that. And at the size that this is, it's, I'd say, about 560 pixels per inch, so quite a high resolution. I want a little bit of extra sharpening just to bring out some detail. Makes up partly for some of the softness of the print process and the reduced contrast range that you get here and between what you get on the screen. So I've done that. I've used the printer's black and white print mode. I've used a good quality paper, and I just hit print and out it came. So as they say, that's all there was to it. Now, I hope that's of interest. And by all means, please do ask questions if you've got any. I've only got this camera here for a short while. I've got the printer here. I'm going to be doing some more about this particular paper and another similar one from Innova that I'm having a look at. Both papers I've used for years that I really like. They just suit the images that I produce, and I'm comfortable with the papers, and that's something you should think about if you do much printing. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel if you find it useful, and please just ask those questions. I appreciate it. So thanks.